A pagan shrine blocked off by an ancestor of Jesus Christ has been opened after 3,000 years.
Archaeologists digging beneath Jerusalem just hit something huge. It's an ancient altar, a ritual site from the First Temple period. But here's the catch. Its very existence points to a forbidden practice, a form of worship that was intensely suppressed. And get this, the site perfectly matches the description of a religious purge detailed in the Bible.
Archaeologists believe that the Jerusalem shrine's sealing off may have been mentioned in the Bible, in a passage where Hezekiah, whom Jesus is said to have descended from, destroyed idolatrous religious sites.
A passage from 2 Kings describes a king who removed the high places and broke the pillars. For centuries, that was just a story. Now they found the physical evidence. They found the very place that was ordered to be erased. Hezekiah's lost site, a subterranean complex. As they cleared more and more earth, the scale became staggering. A series of 8 distinct rooms were revealed, all interconnected, all hewn from the solid limestone. The entire site was massive, covering about 220 square meters. That's over 2,300 square feet. This wasn't a simple house. It wasn't a storage cellar. This was a purpose-built, high-effort facility. It was a place meant for something important. As the team dug deeper, the mystery only grew. In one area, they found a standing stone known in Hebrew as a matzvah. It was about 1.5 feet tall, a single carved pillar still standing upright in its original place, exactly as it had been left nearly 3 millennia ago. These stones were often used in ancient rituals, sometimes to represent a divine presence, a god, or to mark a place where a deal was made with the divine. But what most people don't realize is that these pillars became a huge point of conflict later in biblical history. Finding one, perfectly preserved, was a massive clue, but here's where the wild theories start. Some researchers look at these matzavot found all over the ancient world and ask, are they just stones, or were they seen as something more? In a world without modern science, ancient people saw power in objects. What if this stone was seen as an antenna, a focal point to draw down divine energy, a kind of spiritual lightning rod? Some have even theorized these stones were placed on specific ley lines, spots on the earth with measurable magnetic energy. The stone wasn't just a symbol of God, it was a tool to connect that was just the start. The complex also contained an olive press and a wine press. Now, these are common in ancient farming villages, but finding them inside a dedicated, carved subterranean structure like this, it points to something else. The oil and wine weren't for sale at the local market. They were being produced on-site for immediate use. This was a self-contained ritual center. They were making their own holy oil, their own sacred wine for the ceremonies happening right there in those rooms. Then they found the main event, a carved installation in the floor with a meticulous drainage channel. Shukran and his team immediately knew what they were looking at. This was almost certainly where an altar once stood. The channel, sloped and cut with precision, was designed to drain away liquids. In most ancient rituals, this meant the blood of an animal offering, or perhaps libations of wine and oil. But again, the mystery lingers. The Bible is full of stories of strange fire and forbidden offerings. This drainage channel proves something was being poured out. The official story is animals. But a rival temple, operating in secret? The possibilities for what forbidden liquids might have been used here are unsettling. And in a small cave on the edge of the structure, like a priest's private storage closet, they found a cache of objects. It was a time capsule from the 8th century BCE. The collection was stunning. There were everyday items like cooking pots, dozens of loom weights for weaving fabric, and heavy grinding stones for crushing grain. This means people were living here, or at least spending huge amounts of time here. They were cooking communal meals, weaving sacred garments, and preparing grain offerings. But there were also more personal, even official items. They found scarabs, ancient Egyptian beetle-shaped amulets wildly popular in the ancient world as good luck charms. And they found stamped seals known as bullae. These were tiny clay discs impressed with a seal and used like a modern signature on documents or to secure valuable goods. The seals they found were purely decorative with no names, but they proved that official business was happening here. People weren't just praying, they were making deals, being blessed by some authority. They even found pottery jars with fragments of ancient Hebrew inscriptions still visible. So let's back up. We have a massive 2,000-plus square foot underground center. It has its own food prep, its own sacred liquid production, its own holy pillar, and its own altar. It has administrative tools like seals and religious items from Egypt, and it's all operating in the 8th century BCE. So here's the deal. This site was running during the First Temple period. That's the era of the great kings of Judah, the time of Solomon's temple, which was standing just a short walk up the hill. That temple was, according to the Bible, the one and only place to worship the God of Israel. Finding a second massive, fully equipped ritual site right inside Jerusalem? It just didn't make sense. It was like finding a secret rival government building just blocks from the White House. This wasn't a small, hidden shrine, it was an institution. But the craziest part of all, the detail that changes everything, was how they found it. The entire complex had been deliberately sealed. It wasn't destroyed by an earthquake, it wasn't burned in a war, it was filled in. Someone, sometime in that same 8th century BCE, had gone to massive backbreaking trouble to bury this place completely. They filled the rooms, floor to ceiling, with dirt and stones, sealing it off from the world. Eli Shukran stated, "When we began excavating the city of David in 2010, we discovered that the site had been sealed with fill from the 8th century BCE, indicating it had fallen out of use during that time. This wasn't an abandonment. It was an erasure, a state-sanctioned, systematic, and very angry burial." The question is, why? Why bury a holy site? The answer, it turns out, isn't in a removed passage from the Bible. It's in a passage that is front and center, a passage that describes one of the most intense religious purges in all of history. The discovery wasn't just an altar. It was the physical evidence of a high place, one of the very sites the Bible commands to be destroyed. They hadn't just found a lost temple, they had found the target. But as they looked closer, they found something else. Strange, deliberate markings on the floor, a kingdom's crisis of faith. To understand why someone would bury a massive 2,300 square foot religious center, you have to understand the man who likely ordered it. His name was Hezekiah, and he became king of Judah around 727 BCE, and he inherited a total mess, and that's putting it lightly. What most people don't realize is that the 8th century BCE was a terrifying time to be alive in the ancient Near East. The Assyrian Empire was on the march. This was the superpower of the day, a military machine that ran on terror and conquest, and they were absolutely relentless. They had already smashed the northern kingdom of Israel, Hezekiah's neighbors and cousins, dragging its 10 tribes off into exile, scattering them to the wind. Now the Assyrians were staring right at Hezekiah's tiny kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was a city in a panic, flooded with refugees from the north. Hezekiah was a young king, but he was smart. He knew he couldn't just fight the Assyrians head-on. That would be a short, disastrous war. He needed to prepare, and he needed God on his side. And in his mind, God was angry. Why else would the northern kingdom have been wiped off the map? He was convinced they were next unless he did something drastic. Yeah, about that. For Hezekiah, the answer was obvious. The people of Judah weren't worshiping correctly. Sure, Solomon's temple was in Jerusalem, the magnificent gold-plated center of their faith, but all over the countryside, and now, as Shukran's discovery proves, even inside Jerusalem itself, people were worshiping in other places. They were called high places, or Bamot in Hebrew. These were local shrines, often on hilltops or near city gates, where people made offerings. The problem is, this practice had become corrupted, or at least that's how Hezekiah's party saw it. It was a messy, decentralized faith with all sorts of local traditions. And this is where the story gets intense. The Bible in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 18, lays it all out. This is the passage that Shukran's discovery snaps into focus. It says Hezekiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah. Let's break that down. He removed the high places. This is exactly what the site in the city of David is. It's a Bama. And broke the pillars. The matzava, the standing stone, the exact same kind of stone found still standing in Shukran's dig, and cut down the Asherah. This refers to a wooden pole or tree representing a consort goddess, a practice that had crept into their worship. This wasn't a friendly suggestion, it was a royal decree, a purge. Hezekiah launched what historians call a religious reform, but it was more like a religious revolution. He declared that there was only one place to worship, and that was the temple in Jerusalem. His temple. Why? The official story, the biblical one, is theology. Hezekiah was a righteous king, purging the land of idolatry. But modern historians see a genius political move. By forcing everyone in the kingdom, from the smallest village to the capital city, to come to Jerusalem to make their sacrifices and pay their tithes, he centralized all religious and financial power under his direct control. He cut the legs out from under any local priests or leaders who might challenge his authority. It was a power grab disguised as piety. But let's dive into the wild theories. What if the motive was even darker? The Bible says Hezekiah was righteous. What if he was terrified? What if his court prophets told him that this specific altar in the city of David was a source of bad energy, a spiritual cancer that was drawing the Assyrians toward them? What if a prophecy said this altar would be the cause of his downfall? Then burying it wouldn't be a reform, it would be a desperate act of self-preservation. Or what if Hezekiah himself had a past? What if, before he became king, he or his father, King Ahaz, had patronized this very site? What if they had worshipped there, made deals there? Then the reform wasn't just about theology, it was about covering his tracks, wiping his own family's dirty history from the map so he could present himself as a pure new leader. The burial wasn't just a removal, it was the destruction of evidence. And get this, Hezekiah was serious. The Bible gives another example that shows he wasn't playing around. For centuries, the Israelites had kept a sacred relic, the bronze serpent that Moses had supposedly made in the wilderness to heal people from snake bites. It was called Nehushtan. It was a direct link to their greatest prophet, Moses. But by Hezekiah's time, the Bible says people had started making offerings to it. They were worshiping the object instead of God. So what did Hezekiah do? He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. He took one of the most ancient, sacred, and powerful relics in the entire kingdom, and he smashed it. But let's pause. This is where the theories get really wild. What if Nehushtan wasn't just a bronze statue? The Bible says it healed people. What if it was a piece of advanced technology? A remnant of ancient high technology left over from Moses' time who, as some theories go, had access to knowledge we barely understand. What if it was a real medical device? Hezekiah didn't smash it because it was an idol. He smashed it because it was a piece of power he couldn't control. Or what if it was alive? Some theories point to the strange biomechanical language used to describe angels and visions in the Bible. What if the bronze serpent was some kind of ancient, self-repairing nanotech-style object? When Hezekiah broke it in pieces, he wasn't just smashing a statue, he was ending a strange, non-human entity that his people had come to revere. Now, apply that same intense, ruthless energy to the altar found in the city of David. This wasn't just a friendly rival, it was heresy, operating right under his nose. The reason it was so well preserved is that Hezekiah's men didn't just smash it to bits. That would leave a ruin, a place people could still remember, a place they could sneak back to. No, they did something far more permanent. They buried it. They filled it to the ceiling with earth and stone, wiping it off the map, trying to erase it from memory itself. The site, Shukran says, ceased to function during the 8th century BCE, possibly as part of King Hezekiah's religious reform. The artifacts, the pots, the seals, the grinding stones all date to right before this reform. They are the last traces of a community that was, overnight, told their way of worship was over. This discovery is the before picture. The passage in 2 Kings is the after. It's the physical proof of a high place that was systematically removed. Just as the text describes, the Bible didn't remove the passage. The passage describes the removal. And for the first time, archaeologists are standing inside the crime scene. But what exactly was this forbidden faith? What happened at this altar that made a king risk civil unrest to shut it down? The goddess and the king. So here's the deal. When we hear about Hezekiah smashing high places, it's easy to think these were all dark pagan cults with gruesome rituals. But what most people don't realize is that it was much more complicated, and that's putting it lightly. The site found in the city of David probably wasn't a temple to Baal or Moloch or some other foreign deity. The crazy part is, the people using this altar with its Hebrew inscriptions and ritual presses for oil and wine most likely believed they were worshiping Yahweh, the same God being worshipped in Solomon's temple just up the hill. So what was the problem? It was unauthorized worship. It was the wrong way and in the wrong place. Think of it like this. Hezekiah was trying to create an official, one true church version of his faith, a state-controlled religion. The high places were like popular folk traditions. They were local, they were accessible, and they were probably a lot more personal than the giant, formal, state-run temple with its layers of priests and complex rules. At a high place like this, a family could go make a small offering, consult a local priest, and feel a direct personal connection. But this folk religion had blended with other traditions from the neighborhood. And this is where Asherah comes in. The Bible passage says Hezekiah cut down the Asherah. For decades, archaeologists have been finding inscriptions from this same time period in other places that say things like, "A blessing from Yahweh and his Asherah." Whoa! Let that sink in. This wasn't a rival god. This was a partner. It seems that for many, if not most, everyday people at the time, Asherah was worshipped as a divine consort, the wife of God, a sort of queen of heaven. This was the divine feminine, the mother goddess, and she was incredibly popular. This was the kind of practice that the reformers in Jerusalem hated. It diluted the pure, singular male monotheism they were pushing. The standing stone, or matzvah, found at the site. That's another clue. While sometimes used to mark a holy spot for Yahweh, they were also heavily associated with Canaanite traditions and were explicitly banned in other parts of the Bible, like Deuteronomy. To Hezekiah's reformers, that stone was a symbol of a compromised, pagan-light faith. So let's picture what a ritual here might have looked like just before the shutdown. A family from the city of David might bring a measure of grain, which is ground on site with the newly found grinding stones. They bring olives and grapes pressed right there in the complex to provide the holy oil and wine. They approach the altar, the one with the drainage channel, where a priest or priestess makes an offering for them. They might leave a small token, maybe one of the scarabs found in the cache, as a prayer for fertility or protection. They might even get a document stamped with one of the seals, an official blessing from this people's temple. It was a one-stop shop for all their spiritual and communal needs. And that was precisely the problem. It was competition. It was a self-sufficient religious center operating completely outside the king's control. It had its own supplies, its own priests, and its own authority. But let's get wilder. What if Hezekiah's purge wasn't just about power? What if it was a fundamental shift in human consciousness? Some theorists propose that ancient religions were all built on this divine masculine-feminine balance. The Yahweh and his Asherah inscriptions are proof. What if Hezekiah's reform was the real heresy? What if it was a deliberate political move to erase the divine feminine from the religion, creating a new, purely patriarchal model that was easier to control? This wasn't a reform, it was a hostile takeover of the faith. The altar in the city of David wasn't just a high place, it may have been one of the last goddess temples in Jerusalem. And what about those V-shaped marks found carved in the floor? The archaeologists admitted their purpose is not yet clear. This is where the mystery really deepens. Mainstream archaeology suggests they could be for drainage or to hold a piece of furniture. But that's boring. What if they're not? What if those V-shapes are a map? What if they are an astronomical alignment, pointing to a specific constellation on a specific day of the year, a day when the rituals here were most powerful? What if they are a guide, pointing to other hidden sites or even to a greater prize? This is Jerusalem after all. What if those V-marks are a hidden in plain sight clue to the location of the Ark of the Covenant? Or the real tomb of David? This discovery is so important because it's the only known structure of its type from the biblical period in Jerusalem. We found other high places out in the hills of Judea, but this is the first time one has been found right in the capital city in the shadow of the temple. It shows that Hezekiah's reform wasn't just about those country folks. The problem was inside his own house. The existence of this site proves the biblical account in 2 Kings isn't just propaganda. It's a real historical report of a real internal conflict. The Bible tells us what Hezekiah did. This discovery, sealed in 8th century BCE fill, shows us where he did it. This site was a casualty of a religious and political war. It represents a lost version of the faith, a people's religion that was stomped out in favor of a new centralized model. But this wasn't the only massive change Hezekiah was making to Jerusalem. To save his city, he would have to do more than just smash altars. He would have to move mountains. And he'd have to do it by digging one of the most incredible tunnels in the ancient world, building a city of refuge. The story of the buried altar doesn't happen in a vacuum. To really get what was going on in 8th century Jerusalem, you have to look just a few hundred feet away from Shukran's discovery, because at the exact same time Hezekiah was purging forbidden altars, he was also building one of the greatest engineering marvels of the ancient world. Here's the situation. The Assyrian army is coming. Everyone knows it. A siege is inevitable. And in a siege, the number one weapon isn't a battering ram or a catapult. It's water. Jerusalem had a huge, glaring weakness. Its only major, reliable water source, the Gihon Spring, was located outside the city walls, down on the same eastern slope where the forbidden altar was found. In a siege, the Assyrians would just camp out by the spring, drinking their fill, and the city would be forced to surrender from thirst in a matter of weeks. Hezekiah needed to fix this. And his solution was brilliant and completely insane. He commanded his engineers to dig a tunnel. Not just a ditch, a winding S-shaped tunnel carved through 1,750 feet, 533 meters of solid bedrock. The plan was to redirect the Gihon Spring from its source outside the walls, under the city of David, and into a new reservoir built safely inside the city's expanded defenses. This was a mind-boggling task, even today. But the truly crazy part is how they did it. They started two teams, one on each end, and had them dig toward each other through the dark, solid rock using only hammers and chisels. This wasn't a straight line. The tunnel winds and curves, probably to follow a natural fissure in the rock. And yet they met in the middle. The precision is so stunning, historians and engineers still debate exactly how they navigated. How did they keep their direction? How did they keep their slope, which drops only 1 foot over the entire 1,700-foot length? An inscription found in the tunnel, the Siloam inscription, describes the moment they met. While there were still 3 cubits to be cut, the voice of a man was heard calling to his fellow. And on the day of the breakthrough, the stonecutters struck, each man towards his fellow, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring to the pool. It was a moment of pure triumph. When this tunnel was finished, it was a game changer. It hid the Gihon Spring from the enemy outside and guaranteed a fresh water supply for the city inside. The new reservoir it fed was the Pool of Siloam, another famous biblical site. Now think about this. This is the king we're talking about, a man capable of commissioning a project of this magnitude, this sheer technical genius and logistical power. This is a king who is rebuilding his city, strengthening his walls, and securing his water. He is a master of engineering, logistics, and central planning. This is not a guy who is going to tolerate a rogue, unauthorized ritual center operating in his backyard. The discovery of the altar and the existence of Hezekiah's tunnel are two sides of the same coin. They are both evidence of a powerful, centralizing, and perhaps even ruthless king preparing his city for war, both physically and spiritually. He was cleaning house. He was getting rid of all weaknesses. The exposed water source? That was a physical weakness. He fixed it with the tunnel. The high place altar? In his mind, that was a spiritual weakness, a sin that was angering God and inviting the Assyrians to their gates. So he fixed that too. He didn't just ask them to stop, he sent his men to fill it with stone and dirt, to bury it so completely that it wouldn't be seen again for 2,700 years. But let's launch another wild theory. What if the tunnel's main purpose wasn't water? I mean, sure, that was a great side effect, but what if the tunnel's real purpose was something else? What if the tunnel, which winds and twists, was already there, a remnant of a much older pre-Davidic civilization, and Hezekiah's men just cleared it out and took the credit? That would explain how they met in the middle. They were just following an existing path. Or what if the tunnel's winding path wasn't following a fissure, but was deliberately dug to avoid or to find something? The city of David is supposedly built over the original citadel of Zion. What if Hezekiah was tunneling to find something? The Ark, an ancient power source? Or what if the tunnel's true purpose was to secretly access the bedrock underneath the forbidden altar complex? What if the tunnel was the way they got in, to bury it from the bottom up, or to conduct a final, secret ritual there before it was sealed from the top? The city of David, therefore, is this incredible snapshot of a city on the brink. As you walk through it, you are standing in the middle of Hezekiah's massive, desperate, brilliant construction and deconstruction project. He was building up his defenses while tearing down the old ways of worship. Zeev Orenstein, the director of internal affairs at the city of David, put it this way: nearly 3,000 years later, Jerusalem's biblical heritage continues to be unearthed in the city of David, and with the passage of time, its relevance and meaning only continues to increase, with significance to billions, not just millions, around the world. This find isn't just about one altar, it's about an entire world that was changing, a faith being forged in a moment of crisis. The altar is the proof of what was lost. The tunnel is the proof of what was built. And both, remarkably, are described in the pages of the Bible. So, does this discovery prove the Bible is history, or does it prove that history is written by those in power? Let us know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.